to Wellthy Living Conversations. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wellthy Living. It's here that I connect with a variety of wonderful people to have inspiring, insightful and curious conversations to help you live a meaningful life, both personally and professionally. So in today's episode, I'm speaking with a very special woman, someone I feel blessed to call my friend, Nathalie Brewer. So Nathalie is a true survivor who's faced numerous cancer diagnoses and emerged stronger every time. Nathalie's journey is one of resilience and embracing life's uncertainties while playing the long game with cancer. In 2017, Nathalie received a life-changing diagnosis of bowel cancer, which followed by another battle with breast cancer a month later. Throughout her journey, she's explored natural therapies for 8 months, but unfortunately the cancer continued to grow. So she went on to have multiple surgeries in 2018, displaying remarkable resilience and determination. So over the past 7 years, she's experienced remission multiple times, always hopeful that the cancer has completely gone. Throughout her struggles, she's relied on the power of surgery and chemotherapy, but has continued to search for the right path to conquer this devastating disease. It was Nathalie's unwavering faith and deep connection with herself that has helped her through these difficult times. Her story is an inspiring testament to the power of human spirit and to the profound meaning that can be found in life's most challenging moments. So for listeners that come onto this show regularly, you might remember an episode I recorded with Nathalie in July of 2018. So we discussed Nathalie's cancer journey from diagnosis to thriving. And if you haven't listened and you'd like to, I highly recommend you do. And it's episode 12. So on that episode, we talked about how she was able to marry uncomfortable with calm. We talked about community and receiving support and its place in her healing journey, and how self-love was the base of her healing and listening to her body when it spoke. There was so much gold in this episode. I re-listened to it last night and I was even blown away re-listening to it to myself. So I highly recommend you listen if you haven't, but I have no doubt that today's conversation will hold just as much gold and just as much inspiration for you. So let's get started. Welcome, Nathalie.
Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome. Thanks for having me. So good to be back.
Oh my God, it's such a pleasure to have you. And thank you so much for coming with your generosity to share with everyone about your journey and about your lessons and your wisdom and whatever else comes through. So
yeah, let's see.
Can you maybe start by just catching up the listeners with a bit of a summary since we spoke in July 2018?
Yeah, well, July 2018 would have put me at the time of year when I seem to always get a cancer diagnosis. It always seems to happen in July or August. So interesting time for us to be in right now because we've just hit August. So let's see. I had thought that I was cancer-free, and I think for a while I was. That's what remission is all about, right? What people don't realize, I suppose, is that what remission means is that you can't detect cancer in the body. It doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean it's not slowly growing. And you just cross the fingers and hope that cancer doesn't grow to a point where it's big enough to be shown up on a scan. And we all know that all of us have cancer cells inside us. It's just how well does the body deal with the cancerous cells and how well can we control that with our immune system? And the hope is that you have annihilated all of those cancerous cells, including the stem cells. And so chemotherapy is supposed to annihilate all of those cancerous cells, the fast-moving, fast-eating replicating stubborn cells in the body that won't die than when they're supposed to. And that's why you get tumors, because they don't die and then they form a clump, and then those clumps break down your organs. So I was in waiting, I suppose, at that time. And then I had an interesting situation where one of the first things I did when I was first diagnosed was I enrolled myself into a master's degree, which I know some people would think of as crazy, but I knew that I had to switch my brain on to anything that would light me up. And that was the main thing that I knew would light me up. I love learning, and I went and did a master's degree in teaching. I had been running a company for so long, going into schools and doing programs, but it wasn't enough. I loved the teaching part of it so much. I just wanted to do it full time. Now, at that time in 2017, 18 and 19, I turned all my attention toward that which would light me up, because what I understand about cancer is that you've got cells inside you that are dying and killing you. And for me, it was never enough just to do the physical things to try and counteract that. It had to be mental and spiritual and psychosocial. And so that's why I engaged with a master's degree, because I knew that that would help the body wake up to its potential. And so I went into a master's of teaching. But before that, they made me do fine arts because I wanted to be an art teacher, which was fantastic because I turned all of my cancer journey into art projects. As my hair was falling out from chemo, I was taking the hair and I was painting with the hair, and I was installing hair into video kind of performance-based art, and repositioning hair that would fall out on my pillow, and then collecting it and taking it to university and reconstructing hair sculptures on a pillow in a way that I'd like to see it, like in sunsets and sunrises and geometric shapes. And I went back to the place where my daughter was born, and we made a video about her birth. And I was just turning everything that was going on into art, and that's where I was. And it was a wonderful thing to do. I even took my breast mammograms and turned them into art pieces by cutting out the pieces of the film and inserting black and white photographs into the images, because one of the things about having cancer is that it is such a hidden disease. We don't get to see it on the body. It doesn't appear, unless, of course, you've got a cancer that is on the surface. But most of the time, it's something that someone keeps on telling you about when you get your scan, when you go to the oncologist, when you have a result, you find out what's going on in your own body. And it's very removed. You feel quite removed, and you know there's something inside you that's apparently killing you, but you can't see it and you can't even feel it. I remember people saying to me, "I'm so sorry that you got sick." And I would always correct them, and I'd say, "I didn't get sick. I feel fantastic. But there is something within me that is apparently going to kill me one day if left unchecked." So my way of contacting myself was through art, and that's what I did. Now, make a long story short, what ended up happening was I took the COVID vaccine, and I'm not against. I'm all for vaccines. I was happily took the vaccine because I wanted to be a teacher, and you couldn't work in schools without taking it. So I did that, and then 3 months later, I went for my normal everyday checkup to see if the breast cancer had returned. That you have that once every 6 months, and my oncologist said to me, "Unfortunately, because you took the vaccine, you've got chronic inflammation," and this is a very, very much documented side effect of Moderna or Pfizer. So I had chronic inflammation all through my lungs and through my lymph nodes. Now, what that does for a cancer patient is you can't tell on a scan whether it's inflammation or cancer. So they said, "We're hoping that it's inflammation from the vaccine. Come back in 3 months. Hopefully the inflammation has gone down and we can see what's there." So I went away, came back in 3 months. Still, the inflammation was all through my lungs and my lymph nodes, so we still couldn't tell. At that point, I had a feeling that it was both cancer and inflammation, because cancer thrives in inflamed environments. And then I had to wait another 3 months. So this is 9 months of not knowing how much cancer I had in my body, and finally went back for my third scan, and the inflammation from the vaccine had finally gone down, and in its wake, I had cancer all through my lungs, and it had even gone into my spine. Yeah. So at that point, I decided to do two things. One, keep on asking what's next. That's always a question I will ask. But two, be very pragmatic. And I started to get my will in order. I started to see a financial advisor. I started to organize things for my daughter. I set her up in a stronger relationship with her father. I ticked everything off my bucket list. I went swimming with whales on the coast of Queensland, and I prepared for any outcome. And I meditated daily, and I realized at some point that both death and life were beautiful. And we probably could go into that a bit more, because that seems to be where I started healing. So there was that. Then they put me on palliative chemo. They said I'd be on chemo for the rest of my life. And I went on a relatively low dose of chemo once every 3 weeks. And we just hoped that would keep it at bay for a long time. At the same time, I was asking what's next. And I had a friend of a friend who started on a protocol called the Jane McClellan How to Starve Cancer Protocol. And this is a protocol that's very scientific. It takes lots of medication. It's not very nature-based, although you do take natural supplements along with it. But it's very much about blocking the pathways to which cancer metabolizes, eats, and to stay alive. So you block those pathways, and the idea is that you starve it. And you do it alongside chemo, or not, but it works well alongside chemo. So I did that. And in 3.5 months later, when I went back for my first scan, I was 98% cancer-free. Yeah. So that was an incredible surprise. Yeah.
Wow. And now
so that was in April this year when I found out I was 98% cancer-free, and I just had my recent scan, and I'm 100% cancer-free.
Woohoo! Oh my gosh.
Who beats cancer?
Nathalie.
I know. Everyone's like, you should be so proud of yourself. And I'm like, damn straight, I'm proud of myself. Stage 4 cancer, it's a good one to beat. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, listening to that, I'm sure you will all agree that Nathalie is just a remarkable woman, and I am so proud of you too, and I'm so happy that you beat it too, because I want you around in this life. No matter if death is beautiful, I still want you in the beauty of life. So thank you so much for sharing your journey, for catching the listeners up if they have heard part of it already. But yeah, thank you. And I was just hanging on every word that you were speaking, as I'm sure everyone else was. Yeah. Thank you for being really honest, really transparent, and sharing your inner world with us all. So if we just talk, and I will come back, like you requested, to the narrative of the death and life are both beautiful, but I want to discuss a whole lot of other things before that, if possible.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the journey of resilience and transformation.
Yeah.
So your journey spanned over 7 years. It's filled with moments of both resilience and transformation.
Yeah.
Can you share some of those significant turning points that have shaped your experience along this long game of cancer?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, the first turning point was what I can only describe as when your knees hit the floor. We talked about this in the last podcast I did with you. It was not this. And it was just living a life of constant isolation and not asking for help and not receiving it, and single parenting and running a company, and not knowing how to love or be loved. And there's a point where the isolation and the independence, the fierce independence that I had grown used to, was so isolating that I felt so alone in the world that it was like my knees just hit the floor. I had nowhere to conceptualize. I had nowhere to intellectualize. I had no way out of
Mm.
that feeling. And so I just crumbled. And those points have happened a few times, to be honest, over the last 7 years. That moment when your knees hit the floor, when you got nothing, and it doesn't even matter why or how you got there. You're just there.
Mm.
And I just turned to something bigger. And I think that's where faith comes in. That's why people have, since eons, have always talked about what's your faith, what's your relationship with the bigger picture. And some people call it God, I call it creation and life force. And that really is what I found myself, as many people probably do, turning towards. And it was so important. So yeah, I hit that time quite a few points. And then in terms of resilience, another theme that we've hit on before when we've spoken is about this idea of courage.
Mm.
And the one thing I hear, and I think people who are on the cancer journey hear a lot of, is, gee, you're so courageous. And I still maintain that courage is something that you choose because it's easier than choosing the alternative, which is to stay with your knees on that floor and you don't get up. That seems harder. That's
Mm.
the darkest place you can stay and be. So actually it's a kind of easy choice just to keep asking, well, what's next? And it's kind of what I kept on doing. I always asked what's next and was open as possible to wanting to know what's next.
Mm.
The turning points was also when that stage 4 diagnosis hit and they told me it was palliative. And to hear the word palliative is
Mm.
all you can't see the end of that. You can't see past that. And the future no longer exists. And that's a really extraordinary thing to have happen. And I say extraordinary because there's no other situation like it in life. When someone says, now we know for sure it's going to end soon, that nature of the future falling away sharpens your gaze like a cold shower to the here and now.
Mm.
And you wake up every morning and you don't even bother looking past that day. All you've got is the day.
Mm.
And that was an extraordinary turning point in my journey because it forces you to only be here. Because let's be honest, the future is terrifying and the past has already happened. And there's this need to be in the moment because it's the safest place to be. So there's a combination of it being a safe place to be, but also a necessary place to be. And in the necessity of being in the present moment, you learn what all of the masters of the Far East have been trying to tell us for thousands of years, which is that the moment is where life speaks to you. And that's why death and life are so similar, because life speaks to you most loudly through the contemplation, the real contemplation of death.
Mm.
Yeah. And so I built this attitudinal muscle, as Marianne Williamson would say. I built an attitudinal muscle toward the present moment and toward letting the moment in and letting that wider connection with let's say light and creation in to the present day. And that hasn't left. I am not sure it ever will. And that's one of the great gifts.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we all hear so much about the power of now. Everybody's heard the power of now, or we embrace the present moment. But it's so easy to hear and not really integrate it continually. Like, it's easy to integrate it sometimes, but continually, when I suppose you haven't been at that precipice of considering that you could die.
Yeah.
And I think that window to death really probably has a lot of power in keeping you in that now.
Alive. Isn't it funny? It's such a
Yeah.
paradox.
Yeah.
Sickness of death keeps you the most alive you've probably ever felt.
Yeah.
If you let it, because the other choice, of course, is to go into the terror.
Yeah.
And I have been there. Oh, been there. Like every time you look at your child welling up with tears, thinking, how are they going to be without me? It takes an enormous amount of trust, even down to the point where I was saying, okay, maybe on some level, this child of mine chose a mother who was maybe going to leave early. And the word belief and trust just kept on coming up. It's almost like the only place you've got to turn. And when you think about the world religions and why they even exist, it's like, I kind of get it, because we've had lots of death in our history, more so in the past with wars and famine and disease. And I sort of see why people turn to faith, because it really is one of the biggest antidotes to a life where there is possible fear.
And there is possibility. So there is hope. And without hope, what's left?
Yeah.
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 But even being in those moments of despair that you just shared with your daughter, that's actually also an indication of living.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The tricky part is, how much do you disclose to a child about the fact that mum might not be around in 12 months' time?
Mm.
You know, because, and then there's again the trust. There's the word again. It's like, do I trust that she'll be okay with the knowledge and she'll be able to integrate that? Or do I hold that information back to save her the pain and the fear and let her deal with it later? And I kind of came to the conclusion I'd rather be around to help her through that rather than leave her with the end news and for her to have to go through that alone. Yeah.
Well, I suppose in some ways I've got teens that one is just officially an adult. I don't think you're really an adult at 18, but officially, legally. And one is 15 and a half. And I've started thinking about what's my role as a parent in that respect, and not in the same way as you, as in that I am possibly exiting the earth, but more in a way as in, what is the role of a parent, and really started to feel into that. And a lot of things that came through is that you want to set them up to be able to live without you. Want them to be, even if you're here, obviously
You want to be redundant,
you want to be redundant, basically. You don't really in your heart.
Yeah.
But if you put your heart aside, what's best for them is that they are a strong, independent adult. And I suppose your daughter is a little bit younger than that. Happy birthday to her,
She's 13 today. I know.
today. But she's a little bit younger than that, and maybe those processes you found needed to be fast tracked. But the goal is still kind of the same, isn't it?
Yeah, the redundancy. I mean, it's an interesting one, especially when they get to teenagehood. They're already pulling away, and it's a good thing. And how do you stay in that connection? And the legwork that I've done with my daughter over the last 13 years is the only thing that I can lean into right now, where she goes into her teenage years. The connection is the only thing I think we've got, because the authoritarian style, if ever it worked in the past, it ain't going to work right now. And I mean, I just keep checking in. Do we feel connected? Does she feel like she can tell me things? Do we have a chance at having communication through all the difficulties that are about to pass in her life?
Yeah.
And I think maybe that having cancer for 7 years has brought us closer, because there has been more to feel, more to talk about, and more to lose. Yeah.
Absolutely. I couldn't imagine, but the way you're navigating it is with such grace and such continual trust, and you're really navigating those cycles of acceptance and fear and disbelief
Yeah.
so beautifully. And you have sort of talked already a little bit about faith and trust and staying in the moment. And they're obviously all things that help you embrace this change. But are there anything else that you can offer to the listeners that helps you manage to stay positive and hopeful during these really tough moments? Because whether it's a cancer diagnosis or just life, the last few years shown us a lot of tough moments. A lot of people are now going through tough moments for varying other reasons. What are some of the other things, if any, that have really helped you stay positive and hopeful?
Mm. The main one that has stuck is that I wake up every morning and I know that I have to put effort in. Because if I don't put effort in, even a lesson as intense as cancer will start to fade after a while. You could learn to be in the moment in the most profound ways. And the human spirit and body has a way of 6 months later forgetting the things that we've learned. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't use it, you lose it,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how small or large the lesson is.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was first diagnosed back in 2017, I went through bowel cancer and had this profound feeling of community rushing in to be there for me with GoFundMe campaigns and meals at my doorstep and messages of love. And that was extraordinary. And then I was afraid that that would all go away. And it did, of course, because you're not always the center of attention. And then I remember when I thought when I was in remission the first time, I remember I grieved having cancer a little bit, as we've spoken about before, because it brought in connection and it brought in some powerful lessons that were helping me feel like I was living a more abundant and alivened life, and I didn't want that to end. And so I've seen the period where I dropped the ball and I just hoped that the lesson stuck around and that the goodness would keep on going, and it doesn't. It doesn't. And so I think going through remission, I think I've been through remission 5 times now. This time I finally got it. If I don't actually put the effort in every day to keep who it is that I've become alive and at the forefront, then you do slip back into these ways. Now, I feel like these ways are a part of the human design to keep us held in a false belief that we are all separate. And that is the most alone and isolating place we can be. And my attitudinal muscle that I'm building at the moment is about the reconnection with the fact that I'm not separate, that we're all part of the same hub on the wheel. Marianne Williamson, again, I love her speaking about the Course in Miracles. She describes it that we're all going through life thinking that we're a spoke on the wheel, an individual spoke. But it's the illusion, because actually we're all the hub. We're all a part of the same journey in terms of our true nature. And so the attitudinal muscle is I get up every morning and I connect back in with my true nature. Now that could look different for everybody. For me, it looks like putting my hand on my heart and breathing into my heart and situating myself within love, and then sending the love that I feel, not personal love, but kind of like big love, universal love, let's call it, out in front of me every single day to touch everyone that I have not yet met. And then asking the question, what would this love have me do today? Where would it have me go? What would it have me say? And to who? And that is what keeps me in life. That is what keeps me from slipping into that part of us that wants us to stay separate, where I feel like a lot of the fear of living is, and a lot of the pain, I guess. And I'm not saying pain doesn't have a place, because it does. I just think its main place is to teach us to keep coming back to love. And if we miss that point, we can stay in those pain places for way longer than what we should.
Absolutely. It's like that idea of feel the pain, but just don't live there.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
the pain, feel the pain, acknowledge the pain. It's all fine. It's like anger, be angry if you need to be. But if you stay there, that's a personal hell, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. What comes up for me, or what you just shared, is that idea of, I suppose, devotion and discipline. And no matter the two things that I'm not great at. No.
None of us are, go
Um,
on.
but yeah, it is, that's what you do. The practice is the devotion and discipline, and whether that's to be good at a sport, whether it be for your studies, whether it be for your work projects, whether it be for staying and having a positive mindset, whatever it is for your attitudinal muscle that you call it, it's about really devotion and discipline.
Mm, absolutely, absolutely. And also, what happens after this attitudinal muscle is built is there's a jump in your step,
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone out there has felt this kind of like, sometimes without even being able to explain it, you just feel this wiggle of joy coming up inside you. You could just be driving in the car, or you could be walking down the street, or you could be looking at your dog, and you just get this wiggle of joy. And I think that's how I know that I am doing enough work on my attitudinal
Mm,
approach to life, is when the wiggles of joy come in at least sort of, let's say, once a week is a
mm.
good thing.
Even that sense of, sometimes when you're driving along and out of nowhere, you get that real sense of gratitude,
Yeah,
and it just comes upon you. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I get it, I get it. It reminds me, when you talked about coming back to a place of love, it reminds me of when I was in the beginning of 2020, and I was in Fiji facilitating at a large women's retreat, and Elizabeth Gilbert was one of the keynote speakers,
Wow, good.
and she did a fantastic workshop with us. And a part of that workshop was, we got to think about a situation that was challenging, and then we would write a letter from love, and a letter to fear, and a letter from love. And
Mm.
so just writing those letters, and so basically, like, what would love say?
Yeah,
So you're taking it out of you, but making it something bigger, and really coming from that angle. And that was a really, really powerful process.
mm.
And yeah, I suppose it's something that people can try as well. But yeah, it's instead of,
Especially on the whole, what would fear say? What would love say? I mean, it's spoken about that fear, and also let's say that the main function of the ego, or that part of us that wants us to be separate, is my definition of what the ego is, right? That part of us that wants us to believe that we're separate to everything else, and we're alone, and we're either good or we're bad, and the constant judgment. Is that the ego at its best is deceptive, and at its worst, it's quite lethal. Like, it'll drag you into deep depression if you let it. And so the constant check-in with, well, what would this fear say, and how far will it take me if I let it? Because it will run with you. And that whole adage, of that whole story about, the wolf is sitting on each shoulder, which one's going to win, or the one that you feed,
yeah.
right? So how do we wake up every morning? And it is a daily practice. I can't see any other way around it. Like, yeah, how do you wake up every morning and feed that wolf on the shoulder that's there for love, and that's there for life?
So just touching on maybe one other thing, I want to touch a little bit on the idea of, I suppose, personal and professional well-being, balance, growth. Because you chose to, I suppose, you had a thriving business. This journey got you into doing something that you really felt called to do, and had possibly been putting off for a long time. And that was starting your master's. And now you are a full-time teacher.
Mm.
And you're a full-time teacher. You've been going through this journey. You're a mother, a single mother. You continuously put a lot of discipline and devotion into your personal growth. How do you find that balance or integration in focusing on all of those parts?
Mm.
And no doubt living your purpose and truth is something that keeps you well at the same time. So there's a little bit of like one feeds another. Like, how do we fit everything in? And how do you follow your dreams, keep yourself well, mother well? Like, can you actually do everything well?
Well, I guess my main feeling in answer to that question is you got to give up. Like, I always thought that I had to do more in order to be more. And actually, it was the opposite. You've just got to surrender instead. And what does that mean? For me, I had to drop the overachieving. I know we've spoken about that before, and I was always conditionally trying to love myself. I love myself if this, I love myself if that. And just to give up and be not special and be not coping is such an important part of it. But then seems to be another wave to that, which is after you've given up the expectation of yourself, then where do you place your attention? And I think we have to really ask ourselves quite earnestly, like, where do I want to place my real, true attention? And so for me, the attention is on the heart, is on being in service to life. And I never know what that's going to look like. I told you before, when I wake up in the morning, love, what would you have me do today? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say? So that surrender takes me where I need to go. And that's part of the giving up. I no longer feel like I have to know where I'm going to go. I don't have any goals anymore. I don't have any ambition. And that was a huge thing to give up. But somehow I understood that in all of the personal goals that I had was never going to bring me happiness. Sure, it would bring me things and good experiences, but the true happiness seems to be in where you place your attention on a deeper level every day. You've only have got this day. I mean, I know it sounds a bit woo-woo, but honestly, like, you wake up in the morning, sun, whatever, and then when the sun goes down that night, like that's all you got. So if you have good days, and if you align the day that you have with love or with whatever it is that makes you feel joy, then after 30 days, you've got 30 days of proof that life can be good. So I think happiness is only ever in a day, and all happiness is an accumulation of good days. And I guess I don't know if you're I think into your question, and I think what your question is really about is we're all so busy and we're all got so much on. How do we? And I don't know, but I guess for me it's just how you start your day and where your attention is, your deep attention. And then when you become unfocused in that, which will inevitably happen, can you forgive yourself for that? Or do you go, oh, I haven't done that practice for 3 days, and now I've gotten off the bandwagon and it's not going to give me the benefit, and all this judgment comes in. But forgiveness is the way through life, and we have to start with that forgiveness with ourselves. So how do you get off the bandwagon? I think the question more is, what happens when you don't feel like you're doing the things you really want to do? Do you judge yourself, or do you calmly and lovingly guide yourself back to the next day and realize you got a whole nother chance, a whole brand new day?
Yeah, absolutely. And even if I turn around that thought of forgiveness and sort of reframe that even to permission to fail, as opposed to forgiving yourself for not doing or for doing it wrong, actually prior to that, just giving yourself permission to fail so that you don't actually have to forgive yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I found that forgiveness is a way home.
Yeah.
Because it involves acceptance, because you can't forgive without acceptance. This is the only true forgiveness in my way of understanding is acceptance that we are not, that we are what our true nature is, which is by nature we are loving. So how do we just come home to that as often as possible? And I stuff up all the time. Like, in terms of stuff up, when I say stuff up, I mean I go away from that knowing or from that attitude all the time. every day. Just yesterday, I was finding myself thinking about a situation at work where I didn't feel heard, or another situation with some of my friends and my daughter and her relationships, feeling like I was on the outside and I was resentful and I wanted to be back in a good situation with these relationships. And I can get caught up in that for days, dwelling in that space. And I guess, how do you get quicker at coming home? That's the main question.
Yes, that's a great one. And I think that's maybe even a great one to finish up on. How do we get quicker at coming home? Because it's not about making mistakes. It's not about veering down the wrong road or any of those things, or getting lost.
Yeah.
It's about, how do you find your way back home? Is it taking longer or is it becoming quicker? And that's a good indication of, perhaps if it's taking a lot longer, perhaps you need to put more practices in place, or reflect and revisit the way that you're doing things.
And build that attitudinal muscle.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I force myself to smile even if I feel like crap.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of science in smile. Yeah, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
All right, Nats, thank you so much. You share with such openness and such humility and such grace and such honesty, and all of those qualities enable people to really connect with you. I know that those qualities enable me to really connect with you easily, and I'm sure so many others, hence why you have so much support around you and so much love around you. And yeah, thank you for sharing today. And I hope, and I have no doubt actually, that the listeners have really listened to every word that you've spoken.
Well, thank you for letting me speak, and thanks for the open hearts who have been listening. And yeah, every time it's such a pleasure to be on your show, which at the core of what you do is about connection.
Yes.
It's great to have a spot in, for all of us to drop into that.
Thank you so much.
Mm.
So if you've listened to today's conversation, Nathalie and I would love to know, what are some of your takeaways? What are some of your tools that you've used that we've shared? Some maybe you can add to the conversation. So wherever you find this podcast, whether it be through podcast platform or whether it be shared on social media, please leave a comment and let us know. Add to the conversation. And if you have enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your friends and subscribe to the Wellthy Living podcast on iTunes and YouTube and Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, so that you can listen to more conversations with awesome people to help you live a well-connected and meaningful life, both personally and professionally. So I'm Lisa. I'm a facilitator and coach for life, leadership, and workplace wellbeing. And if you want to find out a bit more about my services, you can visit my website at wellthyliving.com.au, or you can connect with me on any of my social media channels. So until next time, remember, connection is medicine.